Thank you all for coming. We are at 8 o'clock now, so I think we will get started. I do see a couple of people still walking in, so thank you all for coming. It is wonderful to see so many people here, especially considering the potential weather we might have tonight as well. So thank you all. Tony, do we have the slides coming back? There we go. So we will start the evening with prayer. Shall we bow our heads? Father in heaven, we come to you this evening. We give you thanks also that we may be able to gather here tonight as members of our Christian Covenantal Schools. We thank you for the many people that were able to make it here. We also thank you for the teachers and staff who work in our schools and also for all the efforts that they put in. We thank you for the children that you've provided to the parents and grandparents here. And we also pray that you may give glory in the upbringing of these children as well. We thank you also that we may be able to gather here this evening and to discuss the plans for educational facilities in our school societies. And we thank you for the many material blessings we have received. We pray that we may give you glory in how we utilize these blessings. May our discussions this evening be conducted in a godly manner. Also we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So we'll also start with the reading of Psalm 100. Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come into his presence with singing. Know that the Lord, he is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him, bless his name. For the Lord is good, his steadfast love endures forever, and his faithfulness to all generations. Tony, can you get to the next slide, please? Thanks. So in terms of a agenda for the evening, this slide has the program that we have for tonight. It's going to start with a presentation from the Valleywide High School Implementation Committee, and then it will be followed with a question and answer period, which is probably the most important part of the evening, as we want to hear from the membership just how this project is going and what your thoughts are as well. So at this point, I'd also like to introduce the members of the Valleywide High School Implementation Committee. On the far end, we have Greg Van Popta, John Van Kamen, Sean Vandersloos, Kent Ostermeyer. Unfortunately, Chris Hoff couldn't be here tonight. He's also part of the committee, but he had a last-minute work commitment. And for those who don't know me, my name is Richard Welfing. So in terms of the presentation itself, we'll be starting with providing some background information and how this project got started. We'll take a look at what's happened so far. We'll look at the financials to date. We'll review some updated demographics and data, and also highlight the future plans for the project. And then we'll go into the question and answer session. So in terms of the project so far, this project initiated a number of years ago with a, this clicker's not working, so Tony, can we just go to the next slide? Yeah, go to the next slide. Thank you. So this project initiated a number of years ago, and there's been a number of planning studies over the last few years that take a look at the educational facilities within the Fraser Valley. It has been some time since we actually voted on the Valleywide High School report. And there's also probably a number of members here that are new that weren't here when that vote was taking place. So we want to start with just a bit of a background so we're all on a common understanding. So in around 2016 or 2017, a Valleywide High School Review Committee was formed specifically to look at the high school and to review the existing conditions and also to make a recommendation for the future. Next slide, please. So this graphic is taken from a report that was prepared by that committee, and it outlined an approximate 10-year plan and the transition from the elementary and high school model to an elementary, middle school, and high school model. So it was to take place in 2 phases. The top part of the slide, you'll see the existing conditions that were present prior to the project. So we had 3 elementary schools, one in Cloverdale, one in Langley, one in Yarrow, both being all being a K-7, and we had 1 common high school in Langley, K-8. So following phase 1, which was the implementation of middle school, we would have a transition to 2 middle schools, one being in the east and one being in the west, and we would have a 8 to 12 high school. The report and the graphic noted here indicated that the middle school in the west would be at the high school, although it had noted in the text of the report that it may actually be located at the elementary school campus, subject to space constraints. And then following phase 2, the high school would be relocated to Abbotsford, and the Langley Elementary and Middle School would move to the current high school campus, and the current elementary school campus in Langley would be sold. As the plans for William of Orange were still pending at that time, there was also some flexibility as to the timing of when that school would cease operation and would be subject to a membership vote, which did take place, and that school wound down for the start of the 2021-2022 school year. So that report was passed on to the membership, went through a number of different discussions, including a town hall meeting in early 2019, and then in May of 2019, the various school societies all voted on that report and to see whether they were in favor of it, and it had overwhelming support, approximately 99% in terms of support. So the 3 societies that would have voted on it were the 3 elementary school societies at that time. Next slide, please. So following that vote, the boards adopted a mandate for an implementation committee in late 2019. The mandate was set up to have 6 members on the committee, 3 from the school boards, and also 3 members from the broader community. So we would have 1 from JCS, the elementary school in Langley, and also the elementary school in Cloverdale. That is still the structure we have today, although we have changed the 1 member from William of Orange to be a school board member from the high school. The mandate for the implementation committee was threefold, the first being implement middle school, the second being fundraise, and the third being buy land for the future high school, approximately 400 students for capacity. The mandate did not include building the high school, and actually still doesn't include building the high school. So the implementation committee was set up to be a bit of an oversight or executive committee as outlined in the mandate. And once that was formed, the committee also set up various task forces to help assist with this project. So we had set up a fundraising task force to work on the fundraising area of it and also the communications. That task force is still in place. We had a temporary middle school task force set up also to guide the implementation of middle school, mainly consisted of the educational professionals that would be involved with that middle school. And at that time, there was a recommendation to have the middle school located at the elementary schools, which is how we have it today. We also had a property task force set up to help us find a suitable piece of land. And we had a transportation task force set up briefly to review an opportunity for travel time savings. They didn't see any significant efforts there. They looked at the busing configuration that we have, and they said, you know, it's actually very efficient, and there was not a lot of changes recommended there. So that's the work of the committee to date, and I will now turn it over to Sean, and he'll give a bit more detail on some of that work.
Thank you, Richard. Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to provide a quick project update. I'm sure most of everyone that's in this room has seen some of this, but especially this name. So everything Richard just mentioned, the Valleywide High School Implementation Committee and all the task forces that run under it, They all fall under the umbrella that is the Building on Our Blessings campaign name. This is the name that we ran behind for fundraising, especially for all the emails, the flyers, the liturgies, the church news, the school news, all that stuff. I'm hoping that you've seen this. It's our website's URL. It's what you guys write your checks out to. Thank you. And the Building on Our Blessings campaign is broken up into 3, but looks like 4 phases. So phase 3 is the big goal. That's building the new high school. It's built up of 3 sub-phases. Phase 1A is the middle school over Credo. Phase 1B is the middle school of John Calvin. And phase 2 is the land acquisition. And all of these have to work together to get us to phase 3, which would be the new high school. As you can see the check mark there, phase 1A is complete. Phase 1B is under construction, and we're hoping to touch on phase 2 so that we can get to phase 3. So phase 1A, we've added a new portable at Credo Elementary. This portable serves as a library. The budget was $200,000. We came in under budget at $196,000. And here's a couple of photos. We'll run through these photos. This is the portable getting dropped off. Here it is sitting at the school. And here's the new library that's located inside of it, being used today. Phase 1B, it's over at John Calvin. So this phase is a little bit more extensive. So there's a plan. The plan was to build a new gym, add 2 new classrooms, build a new foyer, and then provide space for a new kitchen. So looking at the photos here, some of you may have seen these already, but we've broke ground here back in summer of last year. Those are the forms that have been poured. Panels have been tilted up. And these photos were taken about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. So this is basically a current update. So here you're looking at that long stretch along the gym there, that big concrete wall. That's change rooms and storage. On the right-hand side is the classrooms. There's 2 stacked on top of each other. This here is the kitchen. It's going to be the kitchen. That's the space for it. Right beside it is an entrance, and beside that is the existing school. This is the foyer walking in. This is the inside. It's getting framed up. What you're looking at here, if you can make out, you're looking at the lobby that's looking basically, believe northward into a classroom. And this is inside of a classroom as well. Here's some renderings. The existing buildings on the left-hand side, you're going to be focusing on the right-hand side there. So that, again, is the space for the kitchen, the gym, the entryway. Same goes there. And then this is the back side. This is going to be the back side of the gym. Those are the classrooms on the right-hand side. Our goal was to have this project completed by September of 2024. We are on pace to beat that by at least 2 months. We should have it done by June of 2024. And to summarize, this is, again, I'm sure you've seen this, and I'm hoping you're well versed in this now, but this is basically the timeline in a nutshell. Phase 1A is Credo, that's done. Phase 1B is John Calvin, which is almost done, calling the town hall, and then we're going to touch on Phase 2 and Phase 3, which is the new high school. So I'm going to pass this off to Mr. Van Kamen here, and he's going to provide a financial update.
My dad's not here. So for the financial review, many of you have been asking about the finances. It's exciting. We started the fundraising back in 2021, the spring. And you can flip to the next slide, Tony. And we had the finances in place by 2020, or started in 2021 in the spring, and we had the finances in place by 2023 of the spring. So that's an average of can you flip it, Tony? Tony, flip. So it is working? So overall, 5.47 in change has been raised in cash, pledges, and securities. Over a 2-year period, that brings out to $2.7 million per year raised, which is pretty exciting news for us. which brings us to where we are at right now. So cash in the bank currently is 4.2. Pledges are around 889,000. Securities 350. And so what was spent so far is obviously the Credo at 196. John Calvin has been given $2 million and change, and we're expecting the final number to be given to John Calvin at 2.4 to 2.5. The original budget was 4.89 for John Calvin. It looks like we're going to be under budget by a couple $100,000. So that's also good. And then, of course, there's some promo events that had to get paid for as well. So I'm sure you guys might have a few questions for me later, but now I'll turn it over to Richard.
Thank you, John. So this is the part of the presentation where everyone falls asleep because it's about data and trends. No, I know some of you actually are very interested in this, and I'll try to keep it as interesting as possible. So the first one we want to review is overall church membership. The red line at the top of the page is overall church membership in the Valley. You can see that it had peaked in approximately 2017. Since then, the overall church membership in the Valley has been on a little bit of a decline. It's not large in terms of the actual numbers, but it will be interesting to see if this is a long-term trend or more of a temporary blip. In terms of how that's broken down, the Western churches are shown in yellow. They've been fairly flat over the last 2 decades, but since 2016, they are showing a slight decline in membership. The Eastern churches have been shown in blue here, have been increasing up until about 2021, and since the last couple of years have been a little bit flat. So that will be the interesting trend to watch as we move forward. So how does that translate into school enrollment? This one shows the school enrollment both in past and projected for the 3 elementary schools as they had existed. So we have John Calvin in the blue line, Credo in the yellow line, and what was William of Orange in the green line. For Credo and John Calvin, both of them are at approximately 20-year highs in terms of their school enrollment. Obviously, these numbers increased with the addition of grade 8 in 2021, and also the addition in the West of the William of Orange students in 2021 as well. In terms of projections, so where do we anticipate this going? Of course, these numbers are based on nursery counts and counting those kids that we assume will be showing up. Projections at CCES showing a slight decline over the next 5 years. Projections at John Calvin being relatively flat. Looking at the chart on a bit of a longer term horizon, if you kind of scale back over the last couple decades as well, you can see that there's periodic waves in enrollment, particularly as we go through the different generations, approximately on a 25-year span. We're currently at the crest of a wave for both elementary schools. So you can kind of see that trend over the last few years. So how does it look then for total enrollment once we also include the high school? So here we have the elementary and middle school enrollment at the top, shown there. As mentioned, we're kind of at the top of a 2-decade or 25-year wave, projected to slightly decrease over the next 5 years. With the high school, obviously their student numbers dropped with the implementation of middle school in 2021, but they're getting ready to basically ride up that wave as all of those elementary school kids transition through into the high school. So they're anticipated to peak at around 270 students in 2029. And again, of course, this all assumes that all of the students that are currently in the elementary and middle schools go into the high school and there's no net migration. So this is basically what do we have for students in the system right now. So we also looked at, again, and updating where all of our current members with kids live. So here we have that information plotted. It shows the locations of where those members live and also the center point of all of those addresses. So where's the center or the geographic center of those individual addresses? So the center points are those kind of funny looking dots in the middle of the screen. The orange one being, the orange circle being the most recent one. It does show that the trend is continuing towards the east, with the current center of the membership being between Clearbrook and Gladwin Roads, if you know Abbotsford well. Since the data was first collected, the center point has shifted approximately 3 kilometers in 12 years. So that's kind of showing what the trend line is. I had mentioned that most of these slides were going to be a repeat of ones that you had seen in the original Valley-wide report. This one is not a repeat. We wanted to help understand where different high school potential locations would impact travel times for the members, and what potentially could be the most optimal location based on where people are living. So the top row there is average distance for all the members to different locations. So we basically picked a location in immediate proximity to the interchanges along Highway 1, starting at 264th and ending out to number 3 Road. And you can see that as you go more towards the middle, travel time decreases and also travel distance increases or decreases. This is a non-peak hour model. That's based on how the model was set up, and that's how we could get it to work. So it does not take into account traffic accidents and rush hour traffic. So these are, if you were driving there at the middle of the night when you can go as fast as you would like to go, actually the speed limit, of course. So based on this analysis, locating a school right now, if it was near the McCallum interchange, would provide the lowest amount of distance traveled and also the lowest amount of time traveled. This is based on where members currently live. However, the relative differences, if you're looking just 1 or 2 interchanges either way, is not very significant in terms of the overall time. Skipped one. There we go. So we also took a look at where people go after they get married. We wanted to have a little bit more of an understanding on this. I think you can probably guess why we're interested in this number, because the people that are getting married now are going to be having the kids that are showing up in the schools in the next few years. So what we did is we took a look at people that had gotten married over the years of 2020 to 2022, and then where did they go or where did they move? So those that got married and then stayed in the same church is the large purplish color on the right-hand side. Those that got married and then moved further west is the little red sliver of the pie. Those that got married and then moved further east is the green chunk on the bottom left side of the pie. Those that ended up leaving the Canadian Reformed Church for a different denomination in the valley are that purplish color. And then those that left the valley altogether after they got married is the top left kind of light bluish color. And I'm colorblind, so if those don't make any sense to you, that's why. So some items to note, approximately 46% of those people that got married are still in their same local church. 32% went further east compared to 3% that went further west. So there's definitely more moving east than going west, which is not surprising to us. And then approximately 15% of those couples actually left the valley after they had gotten married. So as this was the first time this data was compiled, we don't really have a baseline to compare to. But it does give a bit of a picture as to where the young people and those that are getting married are moving. And I'll now turn it over to Greg, and he'll talk about some of the future plans.
Thank you. So with middle school implementation well underway, the focus of our attention is turning to phase 2 of the plan, securing land in Abbotsford for a new high school. And according to the current mandate, we had estimated that we'd likely have to spend about 10 to 12 million on land, and ideally we would have the property purchased in 2024, 2025, so with about 4 or 5 years to build the high school so that it could be open by 2029. The original plan also contemplated that the construction of the high school would likely cost around $15 million. That obviously is a bit of a guess, just based on square footage and average construction costs. But that's what the plan originally contemplated. And obviously things have changed since 2019. And with the recent inflationary pressures we've experienced in the last 4 years, we think it's likely that we'll probably have to bump the land cost up by about 33% or so to 20 million, and construction costs likely up about 20% to about 18 million. Now, this is the big question. Where's the money? Those costs seem very daunting, but one thing we should remind ourselves of is that we've made an intentional decision to hedge against land cost appreciation by staying in the property market. We continue to hold the William of Orange land, and obviously we continue to hold the Credo Elementary School campus as well until new land is acquired. So as property prices go up for us acquiring land farther east, so does the value of our existing assets that we hold farther west. In the meantime, William of Orange is currently being rented out to some other schools that are operating in the area, and after paying for its costs, it is netting a decent profit that is contributing to this project as well. So that's, I think, useful to note. Now, when we're talking about the value of the assets that our community currently holds, when they're ultimately sold, they're going to be sold and valued based on their highest and best use. And our best guess is that the Credo Elementary School campus is likely going to be sold as an existing school, but the William of Orange campus will likely be sold and will be valued as if it would be a residential development site. And with the province and the municipalities recently really pushing higher density housing, I think those trends and those announcements from our local and our provincial governments is likely pushing up the value of those assets relatively significantly. So our hope is that we should be able to net out even or even slightly ahead when we're comparing what our acquisition costs will be farther east compared to the sale of our assets in the west. So we have been busy searching for property, and just remind you that the current mandate calls for us to be looking for land between Mount Lehman and McCallum Road. In spite of that, we have been looking outside of those areas as well. We've been looking across the Fraser Valley just to inform ourselves as to what's available, and we've investigated quite a few sites. As we were doing that, primarily in Abbotsford, the City of Abbotsford planning and development staff have reminded us on several occasions that public assembly land is very rare. It's tough to find. We are competing with several other Christian schools and CALSA schools who are actively looking for land for independent schools in the Abbotsford area as well. If we're going to be rezoning property, so if we're going to do a residential assembly and rezone it to school use, we're going to have to stay within their urban containment boundaries. They don't want us buying land outside of their urban containment area because they won't be able to deliver sewer and water and services such as that. And they've reminded us as well that historically they really don't like rezoning employment lands for school purposes. So buying commercial land or industrial land and converting it to a school use is likely going to be a tough sell with the city planning staff. With those caveats, I do want to point out, just as a sampling, for the properties that we've investigated so far. So these are not the only 4. We've looked at much more than this, but I think these give a good representation of what we've been looking at so far. For each of these locations, you can see 2 slides. One is just a bit of a panned out picture here, shows the Langley campus, shows the Yarrow campus, and gives a little red dot where the land is located. And then we will just zoom in a little bit closer if you want to get your bearings straight with some of the other landmarks in the area. So this first location is on Downs Road, just down the road from MEI. It's a beautiful 18-acre site, fairly rural and forested, has a ravine in the middle of it. Quite large, would be large enough for our purposes, and would possibly even be able to be co-used for like a Manoa Manor 2.0 or some other use such as that. One thing that we really weren't excited about is the distance from the highway. So it's a beautiful location, but it is 10 minutes north off of the freeway, and we recognize that almost all of our traffic from east and from west is going to be coming down the number 1. So the farther we get off the highway, the more we're doubling up on actual mileage and travel time to get to that site. So we point that out as a negative. The second location, farther east, outside of the boundaries set by the mandate, but it was worth investigating anyways. It's at about number 5 road and right on the freeway itself. This was a smaller site, only 5.5 acres, wasn't in the ALR, had great highway exposure, and it bordered the Sumas First Nation lands, just in behind there. Ultimately, we found it was going to be too small, too skinny, wasn't really going to have enough room for fields and parking. And another thing that didn't excite us was it wasn't close to any existing residential use. And we suspect that any new high school is going to be a magnet for people wanting to live within that area. And this is going to have a pretty big buffer around it where there wouldn't be any residential use around it. So wouldn't be many kids biking or walking to school. On the other end of the boundary is Mount Lehman Road. This is just south of the Mount Lehman exit. I will say that this is a long shot property right now. Pardon me. It's not currently for sale, but we've been in discussions with the owner, and this owner would love to support the vision of Christian education. So I think we have a bit of a foot in the door just because of the use we'd be putting it to. It is on industrial land, 10 acres. Services are at or very, very close to the property line already. The price is going to be steep. It's going to be more than we want to pay, but we think that it probably has some excess land that we would be able to sell off to try buy down the cost of the land. We do recognize that rezoning this from industrial to public assembly would be an uphill battle with the city of Abbotsford as well. Like I said, they don't like turning down employment lands or repurposing employment lands. The fourth property we investigated fairly significantly is the Ministry of Agriculture building right on the freeway. It's that big red building. I think, I'll give you my own bias, in the sweet spot of where our mandate calls us to be looking. This property is currently being used by the Ministry of Agriculture right now. It was affected by the floods from a couple of years ago, and the ministry has indicated that they do want to relocate elsewhere. So we got pretty excited, try to get our foot in the door there, spoke to a few people within the provincial government, and they said, well, you're probably being a little bit too wishful on the timing. While they indicated that they do want to relocate elsewhere, they don't have any other site in mind yet, and they still need this place for, they just said, several years. So our best guess is it's probably not going to become available for sale for at least 3, possibly 5 years. Just our best guess based on what they've told us so far. If and when that ultimately comes up for sale, it would be a public bid process. We wouldn't have any inside scoop because of who we are. We would just be competing with anybody else that would be bidding on this property. It's a bit of a smaller site, but it is right next to a CRC church that has some additional space right next to the freeway that possibly we could be talking to them about using for playing fields or parking, co-using auditorium space for assemblies and things like that. And there's also some ALR land right adjacent to it that could possibly be used for playing fields. We obviously have not pulled the trigger on any of these 4 sites, but I do think that they give a good sampling of what we've currently been investigating, and we would love to hear what your thoughts on that are on those locations in particular, and whether or not we're sniffing around the right edges as far as the catchment. As I hope we've demonstrated tonight, our community's made some great progress on implementing the Valley-wide report insofar as it relates to the middle school. And at the same time as we see an end to that phase, the phase 1 in sight, we note that the report does require us to take a temperature check with the community before we proceed in earnest with phase 2. The report, which was written back in 2019, specifically says, I'll just give a quick little quote here, "This plan includes checkpoints along the way to pause and confirm the wisdom of proceeding with each step based on possible changes in demographic trends, an uncertain political future, and future land purchase and construction costs." So that's just lifted from the report itself, and our intention here tonight is that this presentation fulfills that requirement. This presentation functions as that checkpoint. So we do hope that you are pleased with how the implementation of the middle schools and the current construction that's underway has gone so far. And as we now turn to phase 2 and really focus on land acquisition, we're hoping that you give your boards some very strong encouragement, give our committee some strong encouragement to now proceed in earnest with phase 2. We'd love to receive your feedback. We'd love to receive it from all of you, not just those who are enthusiastic or not just those who are very critical of the direction, but we do want to hear from everybody, especially the more often than not, the silent majority. Once we receive that feedback, our intent is to brief our 2 school boards on where we're at, where we recommend we go based on your feedback, and we do need to seek their instructions on proceeding with phase 2. So that is it for my presentation. Can I turn it back to you?
So now we get into the interesting part of the evening. We're going to do a question and answer session. So we do have some questions that were submitted to us in writing ahead of time, so we'll take on those first. So it gives you some time to think about your questions and consider them. We will also be taking questions via roaming mic, so Sean's going to run around with that in a few minutes after we take the first few. And then we'll also have an option for texting any questions. In case you don't want to speak out loud, you can text your question to us, and then we'll address it amongst the panel here. So. There we go. So the first question we got was, could John Calvin School take some students from CCES? And I think this was based along the framework of John Calvin School has a lot of double grades right now, and they might have some extra capacity. Creighton Elementary has some pretty full grades right now, and they're running some higher numbers, and they've supplemented that with a few EAs to help address that pressure. So comment from the committee, it is more of a question to the boards of the schools as opposed to us. However, that being said, we don't believe there's an official policy to our understanding, but we do note that busing is separate for those school societies, so that potentially could be a bit of a challenge with that potential situation. So. Yeah, I got that now, thanks. One of the other questions we got was, has the committee considered a western and an eastern high school campus? The comment being, this was reviewed in the original report. It was not recommended, and it was deemed that a single high school was better for a number of reasons. One being unity across the valley. I think we've seen a lot of benefits from having a combined high school in terms of working together and I guess knowing your brothers and sisters across the valley. I think this committee is one of those examples and demonstrations. It would also likely impact course availability, as it's a lot more challenging to run two different high schools and then also still have all of the specialized courses. Oh, we're really going ahead. It would be more expensive to have two high schools. So a single high school would be less expensive. It's just costs more money to run two different schools. It's a little bit harder to maintain the level of staff expertise when you run two different schools. So right now we have a lot of dedicated teachers that have specialized subjects. That gets a little bit more challenging as if we went to a two campus model. And then the other big challenge that the schools have been facing recently, no matter which school you're at, is just staff availability. So this is, again, a plug to encourage your kids to become teachers. We need them. On behalf of the school boards, it's every school that's struggling to find teachers right now. And again, if we went to a two high school model, that would probably be even more compounded. So from a committee's perspective, this is not within our mandate unless we were directed otherwise by the respective boards. Oops, I missed one. I'm going to try to get back to it. One before that. One more before that. There we go. So this is one of the other questions we had received in advance. Greg has touched on it a little bit. Can we build on commercial land, reserve land or First Nations land, and can we build in the ALR? So we'll probably take them in reverse order there. ALR land, very unlikely. We did review some of the decisions of the Land Commission over the past number of years. They've even denied public schools building on, or new schools on ALR land. There is some pre-existing schools on ALR land, including John Calvin is actually one of those. So if it was a pre-existing school, maybe if it was predated the ALC and the formation of the ALC, possible, but for the most part, very unlikely for new schools. First Nations land, possibility. I'm not sure which First Nations land the person was intending when they were asking this question. As we do know, we couldn't own the land, excuse me, if we were on First Nations land. So they don't allow private property ownership. The committee would see that as a pretty big detriment, and I think that's based on the assumption that the overall community would not want to support that you can only do a long-term lease. Commercial land, or institutional land, Greg had talked about that already. It is a lot more expensive, and it would also require a lot of significant consultations with the City of Abbotsford, requiring a rezoning process, and that's a little bit more of a risky process. So maybe, but it does require a lot of effort to try get that through, and there's no guarantee that we would be able to do so. So with those ones answered, we'll jump into the live Q&A. And maybe we've answered all your questions during the presentation. I know it was a lot of information that we threw at you, and sometimes it takes a little while to absorb. But I'm sure there are a number of questions out there, so you can either send them in via text, or you can just ask for the roaming mic, and Sean will pass it on to you, and then we will answer those questions as best as we can. So, did anyone want to kick it off? We got one in the back there. Daryl.
I want to start off in thanking you guys. Those that work on these committees is a lot of effort put into it, and we, as a community, appreciate the work you guys do. It can be frustrating at times, especially here at the property My quick question for you is something that has been discussed before, and I am not aware if it's been updated since, but SOPSOC was always a major factor for William of Orange when I was on the board there. The reason why our high school fits within the SOPSOC, which is the government regulation that we must be less cost than the local district's public school per child cost. We get away with it in Cradle High because we've merged Cradle High and Cradle Elementary together, and an elementary school is a lot cheaper to operate. That's why we never break the SOPSOC line with Cradle High. But the idea of going to this zone puts it outside of both John Kelvin's district and Cradle's district. Has that been addressed? Is because obviously operating costs is a concern for the next 20 years or more. If we are not able to keep our funding, that's a factor. So I'm sure you guys have addressed that. I'd like to hear it.
It's a great question, and I can tell it comes from a past board member. It has some of an inside track there. So yes, it has been reviewed. So that's a short answer. Slightly longer answer, and maybe to provide some context on that, Langley or Cradle Elementary is within the Langley School District catchment, and John Calvin is within the Chilliwack catchment. So currently, in the eyes of the government, Cradle High School and Cradle Elementary School are viewed as one school, and we merge and blend those costs and give a blended number back to the province in terms of total cost. And that's one of the ways that we lower our per student operating cost because elementary schools are obviously cheaper to run, as Daryl has mentioned. So that is a number that is regularly reviewed. I can say that the high school does publish the operating costs for the combined situation, as well as if it would stand alone. So the current operating cost of the high school is still below the ministry number. I think it's about $300 or $400, and then Kent is putting a thumbs up, so I got the number right. And then when we combine it, I think we're about 2,000 under the number, something like that. So we are well under the number when we're combined. We are still under the number if we would stand alone. And why that is, of course, as you mentioned, critically important is because we do get 50% funding, in essence, from the provincial government, but that's provided as long as we stay under that school district number. So yes, we have reviewed it. Yes, we're still under. Obviously, it does depend on the number of students at the high school. So as the number of students goes up at the high school, the average cost drops down a bit because you're averaging out some of those fixed costs. So that's good. So given that we're on an increase in terms of high school students, that would be a positive trend. If we were to see a decrease in high school students, that's when it gets a little bit more tricky. So we have modeled it for a couple years, but it's really hard to make projections, beyond the 4 or 5 years. So it is a number that's closely watched by the high school board as well. So I hope that answers your question. Okay. And we did have a couple that came in via text, or one that came in via text. So since the numbers overall seem to be declining and online schools becoming more prevalent, have you considered just slowly shifting the whole high school to John Calvin property and investing and putting technical and band rooms there? Greg, did you want to take that one, or John?
To move the whole high school, currently the way the high school is with its current setup of students, with the amount, it would be very difficult to build out the campus large enough to accommodate all the students and staff, as well as parking. When you build a high school, you have to have way more parking stalls than you do in an elementary school. And so if you are familiar with the John Calvin property, it's actually where the building is built is actually quite small. If you go to the back field, that's the majority of the property, which is actually the property adjacent to the actual school building. So the property's pretty much built out almost the way it is. And then to try add parking there somehow would be a challenge. So from a property size standpoint, a parking requirements, classroom building requirements, it would be difficult to do. I wouldn't say it would be impossible, but it would be very challenging. Yeah, well, it's also in the ALR. So because you're in the ALR, every time you build anything, you have to get approval from the ALR. And the ALR can be very, very sticky. And they say, oh, yeah, you can do that, but you can't. You have to do this too then. And so it would be a process to try to get a high school there, let alone even possible. Does that answer your question to the mysterious person? You guys are making it easy on us. Come on.
So I'll second what Daryl said. Great presentation. Just on the 4 properties that you listed, the one on Angus Campbell, from what I know that property a bit, it seems very small to have a high school there. And then my question is, like for those properties that came up, you sort of had one property that was for sale, I believe, of the 4. How frequently do potential, like, realistic options come available?
Greg?
The red building, the property is on the small side, probably only 5 acres, and it's quite built out. I think it would only work if we could get a lead on some of the adjacent ALR land that we could use for field space. I think with that we could make something feasible. As far as timing for properties that come up, it's not very frequent. I think we're coming to the conclusion that we have to go find them. We have to put an assembly together, or we have to just task a professional to go and source something that's not necessarily listed. If we just wait for public listings, I think it's going to be too long of a wait.
Thank you. I just wanted to get clarity on where you think the 400 students would come from, because right now I think the student count at the high school is about 230, but the hope is to build a high school for about 400 students. Is that still the plan? And if so, where do you see the trend? Because I think it's a 15% exodus on an annual basis, and I'm just concerned about how big our high school will be in 5, 10, 20 years.
Thank you for the question. It's a great question. Tony, are you able to slide us back to the enrollment slide? It's in section. There we go. That's perfect. Nope, that one's perfect. So the 400 students actually comes from the original Valleywide report. So that was what was copy and pasted into our mandate as well. In looking at the numbers in that report, and I want to thank all of the guys that wrote that report, I think the challenge was it had assumed grade 8 was still at the high school. So if you take 20% of those numbers out, then you're closer to the 300 number. That being said, our mandate has still been 400. The main change that would happen would be the size of the building itself. The land component and the size of a parking lot and the size of the playing fields takes up a lot of the space on the property. That doesn't change so much if you're between 300 and 400, but the biggest component is just the fields and the parking lots itself. So that being said, the other component in our mandate is we were asked to find a 4 to 6 acre site. That's a pretty typical size for a high school. From the committee's perspective, having more land and having more options in the eastern part of the valley is probably better than less. I think if we look at how we've done things in the past, sometimes we buy something, we put something up there, and we always kind of kick ourselves saying, oh, if we just had a little bit more land, we could have done something else. I don't think I ever hear anyone say, oh, we bought way too much land and this is way too much for us. So I always hear more of the opposite. That being said, I would rather, if the opportunities came up and we're evaluating opportunities, more land would be better. And you could always start with a smaller building and see how the high school numbers go. It's a lot easier to make an addition onto a building than it is to buy and sell a whole new property. So I hope that answers the question and kind of gives a bit of context to that. We did have a few more come in via text, so maybe I'll jump to one of those. One was, what's the minimum land size for a high school? Again, our mandate has been 4 to 6 acres. That's a pretty typical number. Yep.
Well, 4 to 6 acres is a pretty typical size for a high school. Most municipalities try to locate their high schools right next to public playing fields as well. So in effect, a high school might feel like a 10 to 12 acre site, when in reality the physical building site itself is only 4 to 6. So no one's asked me my opinion specifically, but if you did, I would say we should be looking closer to a 10 acre site if something like that is available. Unless, we have looked at sites before that are in very close proximity to municipal playing fields in the city of Abbotsford, and if we could do something like that, we could get away with a smaller site as long as we had some kind of a co-use agreement with the city to use their playing fields. If we're going to be self-sufficient, 4 would definitely be too small. Even 6 would be tight.
So maybe going into the next question via phone. So standing on the board of a fundraising aspect of the Building Under Blessings Committee shows how difficult it can be to have 5 guys trying to raise $5 million off the side of their desks. Thanks for the comment. What are the plans in place for raising the possibly $38 million required for land acquisition and development? John, did you want to take that one, or do you want me to take that one? I didn't ask.
So once William of Orange is potentially sold and Credo Elementary is potentially sold, the land becomes awash and potentially extra funds there. So it would be a bit of a push to build a high school. And it's probably going to be what, 10, 12 million? A bit more, 15 million? So there's quite a bit to raise there. That said, is it doable? We raised 2.4 and 2.7 in 1 year, 2.7 next year. So if it's 15 million, 7 years, it might come, but that's where you guys come in. If you guys say, yeah, let's do this, it's expensive, and you'll have to know that, which means I'll be knocking on your door again.
Don't worry, he's friendly when he knocks on your door, though. Next question that came in via text is, what's the projection of people moving out of the Fraser Valley into the future, and will housing prices go down anytime soon? Tony, if you're able to actually go to the bonus slides on the back, I'll take this housing price one first. We actually did have a slide on housing prices at the back end, just in case this question came up. There we go. So I'm going to say I stole this from the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board. Actually, they give it out for free. You don't have to steal it. It's publicly available. Anyways, they track housing prices by different housing types. So the red line at the top being detached houses, the little green line being townhouses, and then the blue line at the bottom being apartments. So this shows the average housing price across the Fraser Valley over time. Obviously, in the last 2 or 3 years, you saw the meteoric rise in housing prices as people sat in their houses thinking about COVID and where they were going to go move and how they can spend all their government money that they were handing out for free. And then, of course, interest rates went up a little bit, and then all of a sudden people panicked and they dropped quite a bit in the beginning of 2023. And to slightly pick back up and be relatively flat since then. So, will housing prices go down anytime soon? Well, they did go down a little bit in 2023. They're still really high. I don't have a crystal ball as to say whether they're going to go down anymore. I think I know in talking to people at work, there's a lot of people that are really leveraged and they struggle when interest rates go up, but I also know that this is a really desirable place to live. It's why a number of us live here, and I think that will continue. So if I had a crystal ball, I would answer that question, but unfortunately I don't. So what's the projection of people moving out of the Fraser Valley into the future? Again, I really don't have a crystal ball. I can say if we looked at marriages, and as we talked about over the last 3 years, approximately 15% of those couples moved out of the Fraser Valley. So is that a bit of a baseline for the future? Possibly. Does it go up from there? Possibly. Does it decrease from there? I think it's also possible. I think those two questions are related. I think housing prices are the big elephant in the room. It is tough when housing prices are $1 million on average to be able to get into the market. I would say some people thought it was hard to get into the market when they were $750,000 8 years ago, and now that looks cheap in comparison, right? So, yeah, we don't have a crystal ball. We're five guys. We're pretty smart, but we're not amazing. So. Question over there in the corner.
A couple comments, observations, and maybe some questions. But yeah, I work with young couples regularly, and there's two things to consider. I mean, we all have young people. We all know how talk goes, but Calgary is the buzzword. Alberta is the buzzword, not only economically, but politically, and yeah, a lot of reasons. I also want to compliment our young people. They have not, many of them still have large families, even though they grow up in tough economic future. So that does not seem to stop them, which is beautiful. But we also have to be aware of the strain that we put on families if we're counting on two incomes to try and support housing and school payments that may increase and all of that. So our school payment fees are extremely competitive, the best in the Fraser Valley, I think is safe to say. I've been told it's less than daycare costs, and I know that for a fact that it is. So we already have amazing rates, and I already see a lot of young families wondering how they can make it happen, unless mom and dad or grandpa and grandma are handing them 100 or 150 grand. They are not going to get into a decent-sized family home that can happily accommodate 3, 4, 5 children. So not only is it an economic thing, but it's also a quality of life thing. Do we actually want that pressure on our children to be able to afford a home in the Fraser Valley and yeah, set them up for this? So some things that come to mind as I listen to your presentation, and you guys are doing great work, but it does remind me of government running around trying to figure out how to figure things out, and then I see the people actually figuring it out and exploring different areas, possibly moving to different parts of the province and having a quality of life where they can have a big yard for the kids to play in, they can have the chicken coop in the back, and they can have mom at home with the kids instead of having to head to work 8 to 5. So just some thoughts popping in my head. Can we work with the existing land that we have, put a few $1 million into those pieces of land? Can we buy some amazing buses that kids will love to spend time on with some internet connections and not make the bus time such a drag? I mean, we're talking pretty big money here. I'm sure there's some nice buses out there that might actually make that commute far more productive and enjoyable. So yeah, we seem to be chasing something that we're going to continue chasing, and by the time we get it figured out, I have a feeling a lot of our children are going to say, thanks guys, but you're 20 years too late. We're out of here. And that could be a good thing, actually, that they spread out and grow up on their own and yeah, I do want to have some people left in the Fraser Valley, but so yeah, some things to think about. Like, I think we have to draw that line as to when we're going to work with what we've got or chase something that seems to be running off into the sunset. So is there a timeline in your planning where we say, okay, we're actually going to revisit what we can do with the money we got, with the assets we've got, instead of chasing this original plan, which does not seem to be coming together unless I'm missing something? And that's no critique on you guys at all. I hope that's clear.
Is that on? I'll start with the end question. What is the time frame? So when the report was adopted, it was a 10-year time frame. So we're at approximately year 5. It is probably a little bit slower than some people had anticipated, but I think there was a couple pretty big events in the last 5 years. One being a pandemic that we'd all like to forget, and the other being a lot of flooding that actually impacted a lot of people here as well. So, and I don't think either of those are small events and likely impacted the work on this project. So are we still moving forward? Yes, I think what we've heard tonight is we are looking for land. It's not always the easiest thing to find. With regards to the other comments and people moving out of the valley, I think we've presented some of those numbers tonight. I think some of the members here who have older kids, particularly those that are in the getting married stage or the setting up family stage, probably have more information as to what their kids are likely to do. And we do realize that for some, out of province is a big draw. Although I will mention that I did check the weather because I have a family member who lives in Calgary today, and they're talking minus 40 on Friday. So I think there's a reason why people also do live here. And I would anticipate that will continue, although maybe not for everyone. So do we want a high school continuing in the Fraser Valley? I think that the mandate that we've been given is yes, unless the boards tell us otherwise, that, hey, we're not going to have a high school in the Fraser Valley. And I think the challenge with working with what we have right now, particularly for those that are setting up on the eastern end of the valley or those that have been coming from the eastern end of the valley for so long, is travel time is one thing, but the other challenge that I think got reflected in the original report as well is it's really hard to be connected to your school when distance is such a barrier. So it's one thing for your kids to travel half an hour, 45 minutes, but it's also all the other extracurricular activities that happen in your schools, and schools are so much the center of our communities, that's the real challenge for like the sports events, the plays, the extracurricular type stuff, and those types of activities that happen. So I think that's the big challenge for many members, particularly from the east right now, is that it's a lot harder for their kids to be a part of that. So I think that's a lot where the push was going, and if the center of the membership is moving towards the east, then having a school that's closer to them also helps to contribute to that vibe and having those people being close to their schools. So I'm just going to check with the other members of the committee to see if any else of them wanted to address any of those items.
I'll say one thing. I guess you could use, like I bought my first house in 2018. I'm a bit younger. I kind of fall under a bit of that bracket with the dual income. I work with people that bought their house in 2002. They live in the valley. Like I understand and feel that pressure as well. But I don't think it's fair to also just write it off that everyone's also going to be just exodus moving out here. Because one thing is that our school is a branch off of our churches in the valley as well. So if we're looking at everyone moves out of the valley, everyone's going to leave, their schools are going to shrink. Well, so will our churches, right? So if you have an outlook at the Fraser Valley as a whole, then you kind of got to look and say, are our churches going to disappear, right? I think we have to remind ourselves that God has provided. He's blessed us richly. If you look at 2 years, we raised $5.5 million. That's a lot of money, and it comes from Him. And that's something that I've reminded myself. You get through those challenges. A lot of my friends do. in their mid-20s, they're making it work, and we just have to face different challenges. I think Richard touched on it as well. Like 8 years ago, 700 grand seemed like a lot of money, but now it seems like, why didn't I buy it? You know, so I wouldn't discount and have that notion where, okay, we're shrinking, everyone's moving to Alberta, everyone's moving to Calgary. It is very cold there, I understand, but there's a lot of things that come with other provinces, like the cost of living on other things like heating and hydro, property taxes. A lot of that stuff's different out there too. It's more money. So it's easy to look at just the house price in the front yard and be like, oh, it's way higher here. I got to move on here and go over there. But the grass isn't always greener, is I guess what I'm saying. So it's a bit of an expectation thing, a bit of a different outlook. I think some of the youth that are coming up, they're going to have to understand that, you know, a freehold lot in suburbia is somewhat of a luxury. You can have it if you work really hard, but if you want to be on a single income and live here in the valley, a townhouse is great. There's nothing wrong with it. Like, condos are available. There's parks to go play at. You don't need your own yard. You can put a chicken coop in the park. There's no law that says you can't, I think. I don't know. They might make you remove it, but anyway, I just wanted to address that as well, just being a bit of a younger member on the panel. So, thanks.
John, I really liked your last point about just maybe changing our expectations of where we live, because I think that is going to have to happen. A property that I do really like is the Downs property. It's, like we said, like you guys said, it's a little bit further away. I really like the slide that you guys had about the average distances. Did you guys do that at all, or possibly for that property? Just curious.
No, it wasn't done specifically for that property.
Okay.
It's not impossible to do if I'm looking at someone, but we did not do that.
We didn't do it formally, but I certainly did some of the math on it. And my assessment of it, and I didn't portray it very well in my slide there, was that it would add about an average of about 15 minutes of travel time collectively. People from the west would likely come down the freeway and still have 10 minutes north off the freeway, and the people from the east would come to that same interchange, or maybe one before that, and have to travel 10 minutes east. So both east and west people would be traveling 10 minutes northbound, and I see that as duplicate mileage that everybody has to incur. So, you know, the closer we get to the actual interchange itself, the less duplication we have on miles traveled by both east and west folks. Another way to look at it is, I said, you know, for the folks from the west, let's say, if they, instead of traveling 10 minutes north off the freeway to that Downs Road property, if we were to just ask them to travel 10 minutes farther east, it'd get them to Castle Fun Park, right? And that would net out a huge benefit to the people coming from the east, right? So if you look at it kind of on a global perspective, that's where and this is just my own personal opinion, I think the farther we get off that main highway, the less attractive it becomes.
We'll go over there. Sean's already running.
From working in Abbotsford, the addition to that, Greg, is also that I think you'll hit a lot of peak traffic hours driving through town during school hours. So that also, it might be more than 15 minutes, just because, I mean, we're work down there too. Sometimes to get across town at 3 p.m. when everybody else is picking up their kids is disastrous. So that's another downer for that property.
Thanks again, everybody. I do have a question. This is not something the committee can deal with, but obviously we're in a forum space here because the committee has been given a very distinct mandate by our societies back in 2019. Oh, look at that, it came back on. Anyways, but I want to ask the question because I think it's something we should really consider buying some other comments. I'm not saying I'm against or for the plan at all, but I do think the board should be really starting to think about, is there a smart plan B if this doesn't get to a $15 million fundraise? Because the idea is, we say, hey, we had 2 years of tough time through COVID, but there's also, God has blessed us with some learnings. We all did find a way of doing virtual. I don't think it's a healthy way for our kids to do school. However, there could be a hybrid model of you do a class, teacher is half on one campus, half on the other, or there's ways you can use technology smartly without forcing kids to spend all day behind a screen. But I do think it would be wise of our boards to at least think of, if we don't get to 15 million more, but we get to 5, what do we do then? Because 15 million is a massive amount of money. There's 300 families in our society, the parental families. So that's a massive amount of money for every family. And so is there a smart option that doesn't force us to move the bricks and mortar?
I appreciate the input. I'm not sure if you had a question there, so I will move on to the next question. So thanks. We do have a few more via text as well, so I can get to them after Adam here.
Yeah, I just want to start by reading what Daryl said. Is one of the most important things that any leadership in an organization can do isn't just, so one of them is saying, we want to take this path. That's an important thing. The second most important thing is knowing when to say we need to stop following this path and do the next thing. And so I think it's a fair question to say, how do we know when we've hit the point where we have to change direction? One of the themes we've heard today is the number of people in our system is important, and where they are is important. I had a conversation last week or so with friends of ours who were talking about specifically William of Orange and how unfortunate it is that it had to close. And, you know, given what's happening overseas right now, if the school had been able to stay open for 2 years longer, we'd have a lot of students coming from overseas, thanks to Reverend Dong. I talked to him on Sunday about that, and he said that, he told me 3 things. One, he could probably fill that school with students today. It would be a wonderful blessing on the Chinese Reformed Church, and by extension on all of our churches. And he thought that because the tuition for those students could be much higher than it is now. All of those things would impact how we can provide schooling to all of our students across the entire valley. And I think it's worth looking at that as a way to solidify not just thinking about this project, but how we can solidify and strengthen the entire delivery of education in the valley, period. I think there's something there to look at that we should be taking into account. I don't know what it would look like or how it would look, but it's worth talking to people who have better answers than I do.
Thank you for the comment there. I think we took note of that one, Kent, and we'll probably include that in our commentary back to the boards as well as we report back following this meeting. So.
For the record, that was Adam. You said Kent.
Oh, I didn't mean Kent. Sorry, I meant Adam.
Yes. He was talking to that Kent.
No, sorry, I meant this Kent. This Kent is taking minutes. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll keep it brief this time. A brief follow-up comment. I do hope churches will continue to thrive, and we'll have lots of people in the Fraser Valley, but let's not forget we have a high school that functions well up to 350 people. And if we're going to drop 30, 40 million on another place, that's 10 minutes, 15 minutes, different transportation for one side of the valley, and we'll add 10, 15 minutes for the other side of the valley. I mean, we got to really think about plan Bs and what creative things we could do with this kind of money to benefit Reformed education maybe outside of the valley, maybe other options in BC where we could support growing communities with our big money from our big land values. So I think we do need to maybe have another committee. If you guys are all still on this bandwagon, which is awesome, you should be if you're on the committee, but maybe we need a crow's nest committee that talks to the young families coming up, asks them where they want to be, where they likely see themselves, and then say, hey, if we gave you 30, 40 million, what would you do with that? Just so we make sure that we're exploring all the options. Because all this talk about dropping 40 million into another high school that's 10, 15 minutes difference, like, yeah, I wonder.
I see Kent actively taking notes on that one as well, so I think we'll include that one in our feedback as well. Coming to some of the questions via text. There's a lot, so I'm going to go scroll back to the ones that came in first. Have any existing schools come up for sale, and is this option being looked into? Yes, it's being looked into. Greg had actually gone through a process where we looked at all of the institutionally owned land, both churches and schools, and we wrote them a nice letter saying who we are, introduced ourselves, and said, hey, if you have any surplus land, let us know. We'd love to chat with you. I think we got one response, and they encouraged us to move forward, but they didn't have anything for sale. So yes, we are actively looking. We did chat, I believe, with the public school district as well, and they did not have any for sale at that time. So.
Got one here, Richard.
That was exactly my question.
Never mind, you answered it already.
I guess it's more of a comment than a question, just giving some ease to some people's minds maybe. $15 million, $20 million in our community isn't actually that much money, especially if you look at the way assets have gone up a lot. And also, money spent now is not money gone. If you build a high school, buy land, just as we've done in the past, I'm pretty sure the Credo High School property was not $15 million, right? So if we spend money now and in 20 years we decide, yeah, things are going down, or in 10 years, you can always sell the land then as well, and you're still ahead. So just because you're looking at spending money and it's a lot of money, it's not going anywhere. It's only going to grow.
Thank you very much for the comment. I appreciate the comment about land cost. Building costs, yeah, you don't always get it back, but yeah, I agree with the land value. It keeps on going up around here, so. Let's see. Sorry, going back to the text, we got a lot of them. So I think we're at 18. So I don't know how long everyone wants to be here for. You can keep sending your questions. I'll keep talking all night long, because actually we probably won't. People probably want coffee pretty soon. But do you have a current dollar value for William of Orange? Does its value increase because of the specific zoning, as opposed to refining, probably rezoning for high-density housing? I'll pass that one over to Greg. He probably knows the market better than I do. Oh, he's got that mic.
Don't have a specific dollar figure, but if you pressed me and you weren't going to hold me to it, I'd say it's getting close to $20 million. It's really going to be dependent on what land use you can yield out of there. Our current modeling shows possibly 68 to 74 townhome units. That was done 6 months ago. And since then, the province has just come down and said, we want density, density, density. And municipalities are grudgingly going along with that. But at the same time, as they're offering more density, they're increasing their fees. So, you know, you got to put all those in the hopper. I'd say it's in a current state of flux right now on how to value these properties, but I don't think we would be too far off base if we started seeing numbers creeping up towards 20.
All right, more questions. If the Angus Campbell property has already flooded, is there concern if we pursue this? yes, it would be a context or a characterization for sure. We haven't looked into any detail as to whether we could lift the property. Filling is actually really cheap. In fact, you can get paid to fill your land. But yeah, that would definitely be a concern. And I don't know if Greg had any other comments on that one. So hopefully that answers that question. Oh, you have a follow-up? Or you?
It barely flooded, like it would be easy to put a 2-foot berm around it. Yeah.
So probably people couldn't hear that, but someone had mentioned that it barely flooded and it would be likely be very easy to put a 2-foot berm up around that property. So I appreciate the insight. So lots of kids to sandbag. Sean's already got gym lessons planned. Detention even, okay. Why don't we open up Credo High to other Christians from other denominations to operate Credo High at capacity? That's probably more of a Credo High School board question. The Credo High School does have a constitution and bylaws that we have all adopted and approved. It does restrict our schools, for all of our schools, to members of a Canadian Reformed Church or sister church relationship, and I believe that's the wording. Looking at Kent, thank you. So hopefully that addresses that question. I think that's more of a philosophical question as to how we do covenantal Reformed education than specifically for this committee, but that would be more of a high school board question. Did we do a commute analysis for the Downs Road location? No, we didn't. But we did talk about that one already. And we already answered that one, sorry. Answered that one. This report specifies a vote. Did you consider this meeting to satisfy that? And they had highlighted a section of the report. I knew there was a reason I asked Tony to have a copy of the report. So I'm going to ask Tony to switch over to that report that was originally produced by the review committee. I'm trying to see what page he's on. I think it's page 13. Sorry? Oh, I think it's just page 13 on that PDF that I sent you. It's either 13 or 14. But I'll jump to the next question while... Oh, he's got it so fast. Can you go to the next page? Sorry, I was one off. Oh, is that the one he was asking? Yeah, can you zoom in on... No. Can you go 2 more pages further? Flip the next page and then, yeah, one more. It is number 3. Can you zoom in on number 3? So once the costs for the middle school implementation are finalized, as determined by the implementation committee recommendations, all societies will separately vote to approve the capital expenditures. So the question was, do we consider this meeting to satisfy that? No, we do not. The middle school was actually voted on a couple years ago already. So the various school societies already did vote on that. I believe that was 2021. And I'm looking at some of the past Credo board members to see if that's consistent. It's either 2020 or 2021. So I know Credo voted on it, and I do believe John Calvin did as well. And I'm looking at John. Did we vote on that, or you guys already voted on that before we started construction, right?
Yeah, and the next vote would be of land purchase approval.
So you probably didn't hear what John asked, but the next vote that's specified in here in bullet point 4. So once the cost for a high school parcel is finalized, the actual purchase of the land and permission to create building plans will require an approval vote of all of the memberships. So again, once we do have a specific parcel of land, we're not advocating for a specific parcel tonight, but once we do, you guys all get to come to a separate meeting and vote again. So That is something that may come on short notice, actually, so I'm going to give you a heads up right now, because if we have a specific parcel and we need to make a deal, we may have to have a vote on relatively short notice. So you won't get your traditional October or May meeting. It might come up at a different time. So, but yes, you do all have to vote to meet that criteria. Another one that came in correct, if I recall correctly, the original target of the campaign was tuition-paying members. Is that correct? If yes, what percentage of tuition-paying members have contributed to the $5.4 million raised? John, did you want to take that one?
So I did look into this. That number is 65%. Of tuition-paying members gave to the campaign. So of the 99 that voted in favor, 65% had given. I did a little bit more thinking about that. I was like, okay, is that low? And I thought, well, there's a whole bunch of families that moved out of the valley. COVID was in the middle of that. Inflation pressures and obviously interest rates on mortgages have gone up. So I don't think that number is necessarily a bad one. I don't think you're going to get 100% every time of people who said yes would put their money there, but yeah, the real answer is 65%.
And just one item to add on that, the 65% is counting all members. When we talk about the 99% in terms of who voted, that was actually only the people that were at the meeting. So if you weren't present, you didn't get counted in the 99%. So it's not necessarily comparing apples and apples in that regard to compare who voted in favor and who actually contributed, because there are some members who are more silent in the activity of the societies. Got a question over there in person. We'll do the in-person questions first.
Where was it? I guess after listening to lots of information and questions, I have two questions of my own just about the details about finding and buying a property and how that would work. Finding one, it was mentioned earlier that it might be helpful to have a professional help us find a property rather than the five of you doing it in your spare time. I'm curious what that would look like. Would this be like a developer type person or a realtor? Might that be a recommendation from the committee at some point to, I assume we'd have to pay someone, so you would need authorization to spend money on a professional to go and search for a property for us, one that's not listed perhaps. Would the committee see value in that? Is it possible that we will get a recommendation from the committee to do that and spend money on that at some point? Are we more likely to find an optimal property that way? That's my first question. And the second one is, if we found one and we have a meeting and we have a vote to proceed in buying a property, how do we do that? Would it be conditional on the sale of the William of Orange property? Because the 20 million's got to come from somewhere. So just the mechanics of how you actually purchase a property, or would we need money in the bank first? So those are my two questions.
I'm going to pass that one over to Greg because he's going to speak really intelligently about this. And we've already, yes, we have talked about this.
As far as hiring a professional, I would expect it would be a realtor. I don't think it would be spending money up front. I think their fee would be in the deal itself, but I think we'd specifically task them to go in a certain catchment area and knock on doors and make contact to people who haven't listed their properties and try put an assembly together, whether it's 4 or 5 adjacent acreages and just try work a deal that way. I don't think, I mean, I would consult with the committee, but I don't think we would come to the membership for permission to take that step. I think that would be within the ambit of our authority right now. We wouldn't be spending serious money on that. Like I said, the fee would be in the deal itself. As far as the mechanics for financing it, we've made some preliminary steps with the trustees of the WOFO of the William of Orange property right now to set up a line of credit on their property, just so we have access to quick capital if we need to come up with down payment money. So we would set up that line of credit facility that we could draw on in short order if we needed to. Now that wouldn't pay the whole purchase price, but I suspect that if we found a property that we wanted to pull the trigger on, we'd have to come up with a 10 or 20% down payment right away that we would use the WOFO property to leverage to come up with, and then we'd have a 6-month lead time or so to pass the hat around the community to come up with some additional capital and to work some interim bank financing that possibly we would leverage William of Orange for, some of our other assets to try tie us over until such time as we could actually dispose of those properties. So I see it as feasible. It's a lot of work, but I can see how it would come together.
Hi, Sean. The property that was, I think, Downs Road, or the one that was 10 minutes up off the freeway, larger property, you had mentioned that you could put a seniors facility there as well. I don't know if that's a real bonus to our community. It sounds like a good option, and having a larger property sounds very nice. I think of Parkland Emmanuel Christian School in Edmonton used to be much more out in the country, and now, you know, the community has gravitated that way. So you had mentioned with the other property further east, you won't really get people living around that area, and I'm wondering if you'd see that happening with this property.
I can take that one. Yeah, that is one of the positives of that property around Downs Road, is it does have housing in more close proximity. Some of the immediate surroundings is a little bit larger properties, but then in the north part of Abbotsford there is some more like single family standard houses as well. So yes, that would be one of the pros of that property. So I appreciate the feedback. So.
Hi, just following up on what Burke said there. Has there been any conversation with Manoa Manor from the committee's point of view of whether they would be interested in something like that? And obviously there's another significant asset that would be there if there was some kind of move out east on their part.
I can take that one, and I appreciate the question. Yes, we did chat with them 4 or 5 years ago. At that time, they didn't really have any definitive plans. One of our members who's not here tonight, Chris, is actually on the board of Manoa, so we have a pretty direct connection there. What we've talked about is if there's an opportunity to partner, we definitely would look into that. That being said, the priority for this committee would be to find a spot for a high school. So if we found one that, you know, met our needs but didn't quite meet Manoa's needs for the future, that wouldn't hold us back. But if there was an opportunity to partner, absolutely we would look into that. And we do have a pretty close connection with someone on the board. So we're going to go back to the text message questions. Somehow I locked its phone. Is there a deadline for acquiring, purchasing land, especially if an assembly is required with the pressure of property prices remaining high, before reassessing of the mandate of Phase 3? So as mentioned previously, the overall game plan is for approximately a 10-year period to get a high school in place. So it's on that slide and from the graphic in the original report, it was 8 to 12 years, so approximately 10. It's probably going to take a couple years to build a high school. So if you move backwards, we would like to be having a parcel in place probably within the next 1 or 2 years. That's kind of our committee goal, and we think that's in line with the original time frame of the report as well. So, basically what we're saying is we're done, more or less done phase 1, and now we're shifting hard gears into phase 2. So.
I'm very thankful for all your technical and all your expertise in finding land and all these reports. It's great. But I do want to remind all of us that we are people of prayer, and God does provide. And so in all of our looking, we actually need to look to God first for his wisdom, but also petition him for land. I will give the example of the Bethesda office, which is a beautiful new office in downtown Abbotsford. This is a story told to me by my sister who was on the board. They looked for years for a piece of property to buy to put their office in and could not find one. And then they had a new chairman of the board and said, we need to be people of prayer. We need to pray for land. We need to petition God. This is a God-serving organization, and we are God-serving people wanting to educate our students. So they started praying. And would you not believe that there was an organization that said, I hear, or we've been told, or we hear that you're looking for land. Please buy our land from us. And I think we need to learn from that. We need to be people of prayer. The details need to be done. I know that. But we also need to take it to the Lord in prayer.
I especially appreciate that comment, and given the hour of the evening, I think actually we're going to transition into prayer and close the question and answer period. The members here will remain up, and I'm scanning the text messages. A lot of these questions that are still coming in have already been answered, so I think I'll probably turn it over to Greg, and we'll close the question and answer period. And if anyone does have any further questions for us, you can always ask them to us. We'll stay here. There is going to be coffee afterwards. I think it might be already brewing, and hopefully it's already on. But yeah, I do appreciate the sentiment, and I think it would be a good time for this community to pray as well. So thank you.
Father in heaven, thank you for gathering us tonight. We want to be carrying out your will. And we seek your blessing and your insight, your wisdom for our plans for the future. We hear in your word that you challenge us to ask for wisdom, and so we do that. We pray that you will bless each of the committee members here in their task. Our school administrators as they inform us on what our community's needs are, and each one of us as members, as we search our own hearts, read your word and commune with you, pray that you will open up our eyes to what the path forward ought to be for us. Pray that you'll help us to consider all these plans, committing them to you, and ultimately stepping forward in faith, knowing confidently that you will bless our efforts. Forgive our sins, lead us away from any selfish thoughts and desires, and change our hearts and minds to conform more and more to the heart and mind of our older brother, our Lord, our Savior, Jesus Christ. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen.
So there should be coffee on. I see Pearl running back there. You're welcome to stay and chat. Welcome to ask us any questions if you do have them. If we didn't get to you, I apologize. And again, thank you all for coming this night. It was great to see so many people here.